Zealand. That's all we're going to say. Ingrid. And then London is our budding orca researcher who recently published her first scientific paper. And they're going
to this one?
Yeah, all right. Okay, go London. All right, so we will be presenting on orca interactions with ocean sunfish. And a lot of you might be wondering how Dr. Visser and I started working together, because I am a 16-year-old orca researcher from America, and she has been studying orcas in New Zealand for decades. And it actually all started here at Superpod in 2015. So I came to Superpod in 2015 after seeing the movie Blackfish, and I had known who Dr. Visser was for quite a while because I tried to consume every orca-related media possible, which included a lot of her documentaries. And I saw her in the parking lot after some panel. That's where this picture happened, and I was really nervous, but I chased her down and got a photo before she left. And we ended up talking a lot more at the ending party at Ken Balcon's house at the end of Superpod 4. And in between Superpod 4 and 5, I had tried a lot to get involved with more science, but I had been brushed off by basically everyone because I was too young, so I was fed up. And a lot of you might remember this. It was at Superpod 5 at a scholarly advocacy panel. I raised my hand and I asked, how can I get experience if I'm too young and no one will give me experience? Which is when Dr. Visser said, you're not too young to come down to New Zealand with me. And since then,
So, as I was so kindly introduced by Kim, I'm an orca biologist from New Zealand. And I was very fortunate to meet London, and I was really inspired by her. And I think it's important to remember that we have two pivotal points in our careers, I believe. One is when we're very young, because when you go out and you do something interesting and different, people take notice of you. And one is when you're very old and you get into my point in your career, and you've spent a lot of time doing stuff. And the things in between, you're just a mess. And so I feel very privileged to be up here on the stage with Fletcher.
I am a researcher for the Orca Research Trust, but I'm also the founder and principal researcher of my own nonprofit, Aquatic Research Conservancy. We have a table out there. Our goal is to protect aquatic habitats and inhabitants through education, outreach, and science, and getting young people involved because we are the future and the best way to create the change we want to see.
Yeah, we don't even get there otherwise. Okay, I love it. I'll do this one. All right. So the idea of studying about orca and sunfish came about because I was out in the field in New Zealand and I saw some orca foraging on some sunfish. And I had read about it in a paper as well. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I wonder how often it happens. And so I started collecting more and more information. The earliest paper that I had in my collection of papers was from 1964, and it was pretty simple. It basically just said this: the following morning the whale was observed holding a newly killed ocean sunfish, mola mola, in her mouth. That's the first one. That's it. And so we were like, okay, we need to do more about this. And there were a few people who had studied this, but not really in any great depth. A couple of other papers came out, and then we started on this project.
So you might be wondering what makes this study novel. So the usage of digital cameras and social media as a primary source for data collection makes it novel, and it includes both predator and prey reactions in the study, so a lot of studies will just focus on the predator, and it is also a global review of these interactions.
So the beginnings of the data collection, as I mentioned, started out with things that I had in my library, and
then we later turned to social media. And so if there was any site where you could upload videos, I was on it searching for orca sunfish, orca killing sunfish, because we wanted to find all of these interactions possible. The first one that we found was in 2009. It's a little bit low quality, but we were still able to find new behaviors. This orca killing sunfish happened in Cabo, Mexico, and something that's a little bit funny about this video is that the tour guide originally thinks that it's a gray whale, and all the tourists are horrified. No, don't kill the gray whale. And then somebody somewhere along the way goes, oh no, that's a sunfish, and they're immediately no longer horrified.
So we ended up with a bunch of records, and we looked at those that have been published, which are in blue, those that were in videos, which are in green, in red, sorry, and then those that are narrated. So the narrated ones were events that had been referred to us by other researchers, or that we had found on something like a comment on a website that someone had seen it, and it might also be an Instagram photo. So we split them up into these three different things.
And the hash bars indicate accounts where we didn't know the actual date that the encounter happened, but we knew the date that it was published. And so this is an overview of where all of these interactions are happening, and you can see all around the globe, and even our next door neighbors in British Columbia, and this amounted to a total of 73 interactions worldwide.
So we wanted to then look at how we actually assess these records. And surprisingly, this was the bit that took the most time, because how do you compare something that's in a photograph to something that someone tells you to something that's in a video? And then what sort of things are we going to actually look at when we start assessing this stuff? So we started out with interaction types.
And so there were 4 different types, and we have 4 different baskets that the data could fall into. So they were based on how far the orca took the encounter and the end status of the sunfish afterwards.
So we've got lots of different ones inside these subcategories. We won't go into any details here because we'll explain a few of them as we go along.
So we discovered novel behaviors for both taxa, actually. One of these was seek surface from the sunfish. So this is different from the typical sunfish behavior that a lot of people know of, where they're just lethargic and laying at the surface, bathing in the sun. This actually occurs as a reaction to try and evade the orca.
And then we saw things such as thrash, where as an orca approaches, the sunfish will thrash its fins at the orca and typically splash them if they're at the surface. And in the bottom 2 frames, you can actually see that happening, and the orca recoils away, just pulls away. In the video itself, you can actually hear the orca squealing in fright, which is quite amazing, right? A predator being scared by a sunfish. And what was really amazing for us was that Mariana, our co-author, who's a sunfish researcher, she said, wow, this is really, really cool stuff. So we ended up publishing a paper in which she's the senior author, which was just on the sunfish behaviours, which was quite amazing because there wasn't really much out there about sunfish behaviours at all, really.
And these were illustrations that I did to try and better show the sunfish behavior, because it's kind of hard to know what you're looking at when you're just seeing snippets of these interactions. And these can occur sequentially or isolated, but we can see that the sunfish tried to pivot to evade the orca. A lot of people think that they're just the world's largest plankton or floating watermelons, but they're actually quite agile. And we can see, so this is the thrash behavior, the first one that we heard earlier, and they will also spin at the surface sometimes. We can also see them breaching, similar to orca. The younger sunfish can get themselves all the way out of the water, but the bigger sunfish are able to do it as well. We can also see them seeking shelter from boats or divers. And surprisingly, the sunfish, there are about equal amounts where they survived as when they didn't. And we saw 9 new behaviors from them in the study.
And then, of course, there was the orca behaviour. And we found this fascinating too, of course, and this was the stuff that London and I were really, really focused on. And we had one category called play/harass, because what was happening was the prey were being played with or harassed. And depending on whether you were looking at this from the orca's point of view, something like this, where a sunfish is being pushed around, this could be play. But if you were looking at it from the point of view of the sunfish, this could be termed harassment. So we just lumped them all together.
And you can see that it escalates even further when they're taking the sunfish all the way out of the water. This is harassment for the sunfish because they can't breathe. You can also see that this is a collaborative effort sometimes with the two orca that are lifting the sunfish out of the water.
But then it escalates even further, and then we categorise this as persecute when we had things like sunfish tennis or sunfish rugby. And yeah, I mean, pretty sad for the sunfish. Some of them were getting up into the air like 10 yards, 10 metres, even further, that they were being bashed up into the air. So the behaviours for the orca, the big thing that we found was the most predominant was that it was kill and feed. So this was an evidence of them actually munching on the mollids. So mollids are the collective name for all the sunfishes. And realistically, this was only followed effectively by the play and harass. So it was very clear to us that there was a distinction between these two things, but of course eating was pretty high on the menu, literally. And you can see just how many predation events there were compared to non-predation events.
We discovered new orca behaviors alongside new orca prey. We already knew that they fed on the ocean sunfish, Mola mola, but we also discovered that they fed on the giant sunfish, Mola alexandrini, and the sharp-tailed sunfish, Masurus lanceolatus.
So we came up with 3 novel behaviours for the orca as well. One of them was called, we called it pectoral fin targeting. Now I've put this one in brackets because it was novel in terms of the orca feeding on the sunfishes. This had never been described for them doing this with sunfishes. But targeting of pectoral fins has been described for other species where they target, for example, the pectoral fins of humpback whales, and they bite on those. But we'll talk a little bit more about those shortly.
And we can see that it is pushing it up, but using the pectoral fin as a sort of handle to do this.
Yeah, you can see the red arrow at the top. That's a bit of blood from where it's actually ripped the pectoral fin on the other side.
And we can see that it has not only bitten the dorsal and anal fin of the sunfish clean off, but it has also gotten the pectoral fin as well.
Okay, and then in the far photo there, you can also see that the orca has got its rostrum up against the base of the pectoral fin, and it's using it as a little steering guide. It was swimming along, pushing the sunfish up to the surface so that it could better manipulate it.
One might ask, what's the benefit of targeting pectoral fins?
And what we found was that these are pretty much like a handle where the orca can grab the pectoral fin and then rip it, and that allows it to get access into the body cavity.
And this leads into our next behavior, which is the consumption of intestines and extracting them.
So in this case, if it wasn't so gory, it would look really quite beautiful, right? It's kind of like those gymnasts at the Olympics. So, I mean, when you see videos of this stuff, it is stunning, but it's also like really quite confronting, especially when you know that the sunfish was still alive, swimming around without its intestines. So what we were really interested in was,
why would they target and consume the molid intestines? And this is because they are they're pretty rich in nutrients, and they're very thick. And we know that they are a delicacy for some humans, so who knows, they could be a delicacy for orcas as well.
So then the third novel behaviour, which is 2 things put together because they were quite often combined, was the splitting up of the mollid into parts, and then also into just like a little folded piece at the end, kind of imagine like a taco, and that was what was left of the mollid, and then inserting their rostrum into it.
So here you can see the split mollid with all of its tissue kind of just spilling out. And then you can see the orca inserting its entire rostrum inside of it. They're kind of messy eaters in this way. And again, we keep asking the question, why would they do this? What is the benefit to splitting the mollids, and why would they put their entire rostrum into it?
So mollid tissues have up to basically 90% water. And orca metabolize their food as their primary source of water. So these 2 things are really key when you try and ask the question about why. And then we were trying to look at this in the big frame of what other data did we have.
we saw that a lot of the interactions that we were seeing where they were doing these behaviors was when they were pregnant or when they had a neonate, so a new calf, or if they had calves that were still drinking.
Yeah, and so when you consider that these are very high metabolic resource, high requirements for these animals, for mothers predominantly, it makes sense if you need water that you can get water easily. And basically, we came to the conclusion that these mollids were swimming watermelons for these guys. That they could just go in and munch on these mollids and get a really, really high water content very, very quickly.
And so we were wondering, how novel is novel? We all had a working knowledge of the literature, so we combined 50 years of knowledge on this, but we wanted to be thorough and check that these behaviors really hadn't been described. And we searched through 100 scientific papers that focused on predation on 50 different species, and we were specifically looking for the foraging behaviors.
And so what we found was that, as I mentioned earlier, the targeting of the pectoral fins that was spotted in the elasmobranchs, so that's the sharks and the rays, and then also in the turtles and the seals and the walruses and the cetaceans, and of course in the mollids.
However, we didn't see either of the two interactions occurring in any other taxa except for mollids.
So one might ask in the end, what other benefits could there be? Because obviously there were other orca there who were feeding on the mollids who were not pregnant, such as adult males. In some instances, they were the only one that was feeding on the mollid. We think that it's linked to social behaviours, potentially also in areas which are not high in nutrition, that it's really hard to find food out in the open tropical waters where a lot of these instances occurred. And so we're just still collecting records and still trying to unravel some of this.
You can access all 3 of these papers for free on the Orca Research Trust website if you would like to gain more insight. They're all 3 green right now. We would like to thank all of those who contributed their data and expertise. They're all listed individually in the papers. I would like to personally thank my parents, Liz and Joel Fletcher, for being my personal charters who make all of my science possible. And I'm not sure if she's here, but I'd like to thank my graphic designer, Whitley Mike, for constantly responding to my urgent graphic design requests about posters to business cards. It wouldn't be possible without her either.
And I'd like to thank everybody who contributed to the research, obviously, and support my research around the world, including my Patreon supporters and funders. And of course, we want to thank the Orca and the Sunfishes.
We're open to questions now if anyone has any. How much time do we have?
Yeah. A minute?
London, I have, so that was wonderful, beautiful presentation, excellent.
Thank you.
In the early ages, so it's a great connection of they need water, here's the water source, and they're doing it because they have their babies. Is there any chance there's also a teaching of the young, much like teaching them to catch salmon, or teaching them to, catch other prey in other areas of the world? Is there any way?
Yeah, Kelly, great question. And we should have led at the beginning, but we got a little bit distracted because we had to reformat all our slides. So for any speakers, please know that if you've got wide format, you're going to have to reformat your presentation. So we ran out of time to mention this at the beginning, that there's lots and lots of stuff in the papers that we're not mentioning today, and one of those is actually teaching and learning. Yeah, we saw it happening quite a bit. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll repeat the question. Is play and harass typically followed by kill and feed? What we did was we terminated it where the video or the picture terminated. So what you see was the end result. So if it said play and harass, we didn't see anything escalate above that. So we always put it at the furthest that we could ascertain what was going on. We ended up with quite a few where we didn't know because, for example, the sunfish and the orca might drift down really deep and the video just sort of faded out. And then, again, this is why we want to keep gathering more data. But we suspect In most instances, what we saw as the termination, what actually was the termination. So play and harass might be, toss it around and then they swim off. Yeah. The orca or the sunfish, both. Last question?
I got one.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of the data that you gathered was from like social media and stuff like that. Is there any data set that you have on ecotypes of orcas that were observed, or was it mostly like resident populations?
Yes, so we had an entire system for categorizing ecotypes. We weren't able to put like confirmed ecotypes, but we did put it based on geographics. So we put whether we knew they were a fish eater or a fish and a mammal eater or just a mammal eater. And we decided that that data was making it really convoluted, but we do have that information.
It's in the paper. Yeah, it's in the supplementals and it's in the paper. The reason that we didn't put it here is because we've got such a short TED Talk style talk. But yeah, download the papers. There's heaps of stuff in there. What we did find surprisingly was that it was predominantly the mammal eaters that were doing this. Yeah.
I got a quick one.
Yeah.
Is there any correlation between salinity level and them eating these sunfish? You were talking about pregnant orcas absorbing their moisture or their water through that.
Yeah, no, we didn't find any correlation because we were finding pregnant females in cold water off California, for example, and off South America and off South Africa. So, yeah, there was no correlation. Yeah. Great. Well, look, we'll stop because we don't want to overrun. We want to try and keep to time, but thank you very much, team.